EU fishing fleets have to UK waters and how quickly any changes happen. Then there's a more fundamental question of the level playing field. That's measures to ensure businesses on one side don't have an unfair advantage. Brussels wants the UK to stick closely to its rules on things like workers' rights, environmental regulations and especially state aid to businesses. Lastly, there's governance, including how any agreement would be enforced and what role institutions such as the European Court of Justice would have. If no deal's in place by the end of the year, the UK will be operating under World Trade Organization rules, with a bloc that accounted for 43% of British exports and 51% of UK imports last year. The British government says it's ready for such a scenario, but business groups are warning of major disruption.
There'll be no formal cooperation between the two sides, so all kinds of goods can get held up at the border. A lot of businesses who do trade with Europe will go under. Our manufacturing industries are very exposed, farming's very exposed, even fishing is incredibly exposed.
Even if there is a deal, customs checks and paperwork could create a real challenge.
We know that there won't be tariffs and quotas under a deal. I mean, that's obvious. It would be ridiculous to impose tariffs and quotas. But we do not know to what extent that the EU will allow manufacturing parts, cars, chemicals, parts of the aerospace industry to flow freely into the EU market.
And the talks could get overtaken by events in the Westminster Parliament. From Monday, it's set to re-examine the Internal Market Bill, which breaks the terms of the UK's already agreed protocol on Northern Ireland. That could kill off any prospect of giving negotiations yet another final chance. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
So what happens if Britain and the EU fail to agree a trade deal? Well, the movement of goods between the two could seize up overnight, with both sides enforcing tariffs and custom checks at the border. While EU countries lose access to a big market, it's Britain that's set to lose out most, as Europe accounts for nearly half of its trade. The economic knock-on could be harsh, with an expected 2% drop in the UK's economic output and nearly 250,000 jobs lost. But the impact wouldn't only be financial. It will affect everything from energy supplies to intelligence sharing. And there are fears that changes to the UK's only land border with the EU, which is in Northern Ireland, could stoke violent tensions from the past. Well, Jonathan Portis is a professor of economics at King's College here in London. He's also a senior fellow at UK in a Changing Europe. He joins us now from London via Skype. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. Both sides obviously have a lot to lose, and I suppose the fact they are still negotiating means that both sides are reluctant to just walk away without a deal. Where do you think the compromise will be here?
Well, the compromise will be where it has been for the last 6 months. This is, nothing has really fundamentally changed. The outlines of the deal have always been very clear. A compromise on fishing rights, whereby the UK gets back some but not all of its fish, and a compromise on the level field provisions, where the UK agrees to some disciplines over future changes on state aids, environmental and labour protections, but the EU accepts that the UK is indeed an independent country and has some flexibility which it didn't have as a member of the EU. There is nothing has really changed in the last few months. The outline of this compromise has always been very clear. The only question remains, the question which has always been, which is whether Boris Johnson in particular is prepared to accept this compromise or not.
Focusing on, I suppose, assuming that the deal does go ahead and something is signed in the coming days, I mean, realistically, we've got 25 days to go now. Just to remind our international viewers, we have a transition period that the UK is in now, which ends at the end of December. So even if a deal is finalised, I mean, there's quite a lot to dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to this, because in 25 days, the UK is officially and completely out of the EU. How many practicalities do you think need to be put in place?
Well, that's absolutely right. And the most important thing to remember is that whether or not there is a deal, there will be these very major changes. And indeed, in some respects, a deal is secondary. A deal doesn't really make any difference to, for example, the fact that custom checks will be imposed on the 1st of January, deal or no deal. A deal will make things easier. There will be no tariffs. But the vast majority of the extra bureaucracy, the extra border controls, and all the rest extra regulatory barriers, those are going to come deal or no deal. And you're right that there isn't very much time. So there are two sets of things which have to happen. One is dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the deal, as you say. Now, that is a political and legal process. It probably can be done, both in Brussels and in London, but time will be tight. But perhaps more importantly is actually putting those administrative and bureaucratic processes into place in a way which ensures there is no major disruption on January the 1st. That requires computer systems, border check processes, both new people on the government side to administer these processes, but also crucially for business to understand what is expected when you're trading across borders in future. And we're quite a long way from that at the moment.
It seems that Brexit has almost bookended the 2020 year for the UK, because it started with Brexit, ending with Brexit. Of course, in the middle, it was all about COVID, which, of course, is still a major issue. How do you think that's affected the way that Boris Johnson is thinking about a possible negotiation or a possible compromise?
I'm not sure it has actually affected things as much as people might think. I mean, you know, the outline of this compromise deal that is currently on the table has been there for at least the last 6 months, probably longer. And I think Johnson has probably not made up his mind yet, because he never makes up his mind until he absolutely has to, as we saw on Brexit itself, and then subsequently on the withdrawal agreement. So I'm not sure COVID is actually a big determining factor. Johnson is torn between, as he always has been, between the fact that he knows that a deal will be economically preferable for the UK, but that politically there are good reasons to go for no deal.
And just the last very brief question. I mean, we've been saying it's crunch time for Brexit talks, well, for years and certainly months. Is it crunch time now? I mean, does a deal have to be agreed in the next 2-3 days, or otherwise it is going to be a no-deal Brexit?
Well, a number of us, including me, have been wrong on this before, and thinking that we were at a crunch when it turned out we weren't quite there yet. But yes, I think we are genuinely at a crunch now. If the talks break down in the next few days, it is very difficult indeed to see how a no deal is averted. Whereas if there is an agreement, then one way or another, they will find a way to put into practice, even if it's inevitably rather messy and chaotic at first.